Isaiah stepped out of his black Cadillac, his polished shoes sinking into the red dust of the old neighborhood. He expected to see the white picket fence he had paid for from overseas. Instead, his eyes locked onto a leaning shack patched with rusted tin and rotting plywood. Right next to it, two massive marble mansions towered like giants, their gold-trimmed gates gleaming in the sun. Isaiah's heart hammered against his ribs. He walked toward the shack, his breath coming in sharp, jagged gasps. Through a cracked window, he saw a woman with bone-thin arms scrubbing a floor by candlelight. It was his mother, Doris. But on the wall behind her hung a large, framed photograph of Isaiah himself, draped in a black funeral ribbon. Isaiah froze, his hand trembling as he reached for the latch. Why did his sisters live in palaces while his mother rotted in a shed? And why was there a memorial for a son who was still standing at the door? Isaiah pushed the door open, the rusty hinges screaming in the silence. The air inside the shack was heavy with the smell of damp wood and old grease. He watched as the thin woman by the candle flinched, her entire body jerking in fear. She didn't look up. She didn't greet him. She just pushed her scrubbing brush faster against the floorboards. Her fingers were gnarled, the skin pulled tight over bone, and her cheap cotton dress was faded to the color of ash. Isaiah's voice caught in his throat. He managed to whisper one word, "Mom." The brush stopped, Doris froze, but she still didn't raise her head. Her shoulders began to shake. "Go away." And she croaked, her voice a dry rasp. "I told you I don't have any more money. Please, just tell Keisha I'm working. I'm almost done." Isaiah felt a chill crawl down his spine. Why was his mother terrified of her own daughter? Why was she talking about money as if she were a servant in debt? He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the small, flickering candle. He reached out to touch her shoulder, but his hand stopped midair. On the small wooden crate next to her bed lay a stack of envelopes. They were all yellowed and dusty. Isaiah recognized the handwriting immediately. It was his own. He had sent these letters from abroad every single month for 12 years. But as his eyes scanned the pile, his blood turned to ice. Every single envelope was still sealed. None of them had been opened. Beside the letters lay a small, official-looking document with a red stamp. Isaiah lined in, his heart thundering against his ribs. It was a bank notification, dated 5 years ago. It stated that all monthly wire transfers from an overseas account had been redirected to a secondary joint holder due to the confirmed passing of the primary beneficiary. Isaiah looked from the document to the funeral photo on the wall, then back to his trembling mother. She wasn't just living in a shack. She was living in a graveyard of secrets. He realized then that his sisters hadn't just taken the money. They had deleted his very existence. But why was his mother playing along with the lie? As he opened his mouth to speak, the sound of a heavy car door slamming echoed from outside. High-heeled shoes began to click sharply against the gravel. Heading straight for the shack, a cold, familiar voice shouted, "Old woman, why isn't my laundry finished yet?" The heavy wooden door of the shack swung open with a violent bang. Keisha stepped inside, her designer heels sinking into the dirt floor. She was wearing a silk dress that cost more than everything in this room combined. She didn't notice Isaiah standing in the shadows behind the rusted refrigerator. Her eyes were fixed only on her mother. She tossed a bundle of stained lace onto the floor, right into the puddle of dirty water where Doris was kneeling. "I need these white by tonight," Keisha snapped, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "And don't use the good soap. That's for the main house." Doris didn't look up. She reached for the lace with trembling fingers. Her head bowed low. "I'm trying, Keisha, my back. It's just a bit stiff today." Keisha let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Your back. You're lucky I let you stay on this property at all. After your son died and left us with all those debts, you're a liability." Isaiah felt a roar of fire in his chest. Debts. He had sent enough money to buy the entire street. He watched as Keisha pulled out a gold-plated smartphone. She began scrolling through photos of a new swimming pool. Yolanda and I are hosting the gala tonight, she said, her voice dripping with pride. Don't you dare come near the gates. The guests don't need to see a beggar wandering around. She turned to leave, but then she stopped. Her eyes fell on the small crate where Isaiah's unopened letters lay. Her expression shifted from arrogance to a cold, calculating mask. She walked over and picked up the top envelope. I told you to burn these, old woman, Keisha hissed. She ripped the letter in half without even looking at the name on the front. There is no one coming for you. He's gone. Accept it. She threw the torn paper into the small cooking fire in the corner. As the flames licked the handwriting Isaiah had spent hours crafting, Keisha spotted something else. She saw the Cadillac parked down the road through the grime-streaked window. Who is that outside? Keisha whispered, her voice suddenly thin. She didn't recognize her brother, but she recognized the price of the car. She turned back to her mother, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Who did you talk to today, Doris? Before his mother could answer, Isaiah stepped out from the darkness, the light from the candle catching the sharp line of his suit. He didn't say a word. He just held up the other half of the torn letter. Keisha froze. The half-torn paper in her hand fluttered to the dirt floor. She squinted, her eyes darting from Isaiah's expensive leather shoes up to his face. For a second, the shack was deathly silent. Only the crackle of the burning letter in the corner broke the quiet. Who are you? Keisha asked, her voice trembling. She stepped back, nearly tripping over the bucket of dirty water. This is private property. You can't just break in here. Isaiah stepped forward into the full glow of the candlelight. He didn't answer. He looked at his mother, who was still kneeling on the floor, staring at him with wide, hollow eyes. Doris's lips moved, but no sound came out. She reached out a shaking hand, touching the fabric of Isaiah's trousers as if testing if he were a ghost. Keisha, Isaiah said. His voice was low, vibrating with a cold fury. Is this how you've been spending my money? Keisha's face went pale. The arrogance drained out of her features, replaced by a mask of pure terror. She looked at the Cadillac through the window, then back at the man standing in front of her. Isaiah, she whispered, but the lawyers. They said the mission went wrong. They sent the death certificate. We saw the wreckage on the news. The wreckage, Isaiah took another step. Or the lie you paid someone to tell. Keisha's eyes darted toward the door, her hand instinctively clutching her designer bag. She wasn't just shocked to see him alive. She looked guilty, as if a massive, 12-year-old secret had just started to crumble. Outside, a second car pulled up. The headlights swept across the shack, blinding them for a moment. It was Yolanda. She stepped out, laughing into her phone about the gala. Keisha, why are you still in that disgusting hut? The caterers are here. Isaiah didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on Keisha. Go ahead, he said softly. Tell her the dead man has come home to collect his debts. Keisha's mouth opened, but she couldn't speak. She looked at the damage on the wall, then at her living brother. The contrast was too much. The secret was out, but the nightmare for her was just beginning. Isaiah's return has just shattered 12 years of lies, and justice is finally calling at the door. If you believe a mother should never be treated this way, please give this video a like and subscribe to see how Isaiah handles his sisters. By the way, we'd love to know where you are watching this from. Are you joining us from New York, South Africa, or maybe London? Let us know in the comments. Yolanda stepped into the doorway, her phone still pressed to her ear. The laughter died on her lips as she took in the scene. She saw the bucket of dirty water, her sister shaking in the corner, and a tall man in a tailored suit standing over their mother. What is going on in here? Yolanda snapped, her eyes narrowing. Keisha, who is this man? Why is he touching the old woman? Keisha didn't answer. She was backed against the rotting wall, her chest heaving. She pointed a trembling finger at Isaiah, but her voice failed her. Isaiah turned slowly. The candlelight caught the sharp edge of his jaw. 12 years, Yolanda, he said. You haven't changed, still loud. Still entitled. Yolanda's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the dirt floor with a soft thud. She took a staggering step back, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. No. She breathed. It's not possible. You're dead. We have the papers. We have the official report from the embassy. Isaiah took a step toward her, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. The embassy. Or the forged documents you used to empty my accounts. Yolanda suddenly lunged forward, not to hug him, but to grab the stack of letters on the crate. She tried to shove them into her expensive handbag, her movements frantic and disorganized. This is a prank, or she hissed, her voice rising to a panicked scream. You're an actor, Keisha. Call the police. This man is an imposter trying to steal our inheritance. In the corner, Doris finally spoke. Her voice was a broken whisper. Isaiah, my son. They told me you were in the ground. They made me sign. They said it was for your funeral. Isaiah froze. He looked at the paper Yolanda was trying to hide. It wasn't just a bank document. He saw the corner of a deed for the very land they were standing on. Yolanda saw him looking and bolted for the door, screaming for her security guards. But as she reached the threshold, she stopped dead. Two men in dark suits, Isaiah's personal security, were already standing there, blocking her paths. Isaiah walked over to his mother and gently lifted her from the floor. He didn't look at his sisters. He looked at the small, locked wooden box tucked under his mother's bed. What's in the box? Keisha, Isaiah asked, his voice deathly quiet. The one you've been trying to break into for 10 years. Keisha's eyes darted to the wooden box, then to the door. She let out a frantic, shrill whistle. Within seconds, the sound of heavy footsteps pounded against the gravel outside. 3 men in security uniforms, hired for the gala, shoved their way past Isaiah's guards at the entrance. Behind them, a group of wealthy neighbors in tuxedos and evening gowns gathered, their faces filled with judgment and confusion. There he is, Yolanda screamed, pointing at Isaiah. This man is harassing our mother. He's trying to rob her. Get him out of here. The neighbors began to whisper, their voices sharp and cold. Is that a drifter in a stolen suit? One woman muttered, clutching her pearls. How dare he disturb the sisters during such an important event? Keisha saw the crowd and her confidence returned like a venomous snake. She stepped forward and slapped the wooden box away from Isaiah's reach. It tumbled across the dirt, but this heavy iron lock held firm. You want to know what's in there? Keisha hissed, loud enough for the crowd to hear. It's nothing but the ramblings of a senile woman. Our brother is dead, and this man is a predator. Look at her. She's confused because of him. Isaiah didn't flinch. He looked at the security guards moving in on him. Then, he looked at his mother. Doris was cowering, hiding her face in her hands as the wealthy neighbors took photos of the shack lady and the intruder with their phones. The humiliation was public. It was a spectacle. One of the guards grabbed Isaiah by the shoulder. Move it, pal. Before we make you moves. Isaiah reached into his inner pocket. The neighbors gasped, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small, tarnished silver key. It was the same key he had worn around his neck for 12 years, the twin to the one his father had given him. This box wasn't for you, Keisha, Isaiah said, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. It was for the day I came back. And since you've invited the whole neighborhood to watch, let's see what you've been so desperate to steal. He tossed the key to his mother. Doris's eyes widened. She grabbed the key with trembling fingers and crawled toward the box. But Keisha lunged forward, her high heel coming down hard on her mother's wrist. Don't you dare touch that, Keisha screamed. The crowd went silent. The neighbors stopped whispering. Even the guards froze. Isaiah's face turned into a mask of pure, unadulterated ice. He didn't look at the guards anymore. He looked at the small piece of paper that had just slipped out from a hidden compartment in the box as it hit the ground. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a birth certificate, but it didn't have Isaiah's name on it. It had a name no one in the family had ever mentioned before. Yolanda snatched the birth certificate from the dirt before Isaiah could reach it. Her eyes scanned the faded ink, and a jagged, cruel smile spread across her face. She held the paper high, waving it toward the crowd of judgmental neighbors. "Look at this," Yolanda shouted, her voice trembling with a fake sense of betrayal. "This isn't even about Isaiah. This certificate is for a child named Marcus, a child born 3 years before Isaiah was even thought of." She turned to the neighbors, her eyes brimming with calculated tears. "Do you say? Our mother didn't just lose our brother. She's been hiding a secret child, a bastard she had before she married our father. This man isn't Isaiah. He's the son of a stranger, coming back to claim a house that doesn't belong to him." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The neighbors began to sneer, their whispers turning into loud condemnations. "A secret child," one man spat. "Disgusting. No wonder she's living in a shack. She's been shaming this family for decades." Isaiah watched his mother. Doris was shaking her head violently, her face buried in her knees. She wasn't crying because of the birth certificate. She was crying because of the look of pure hatred Keisha was giving her. Keisha stepped closer to Isaiah, her face inches from his. "You thought you were so smart," she hissed. "But you're just another lie our mother told. You're not the successful son, you're just Marcus, the boy who was never supposed to exist, the boy who was given away so we could have a respectable name." Isaiah looked at the certificate in Yolanda's hand. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated, but not for the reason they thought. He looked at the date on the paper. Then he looked at the expensive marble mansion behind Keisha. "Is that what you believe?" Isaiah asked, his voice thick with a strange, dark irony. "You think I'm Marcus. You think this paper is proof that I'm an outsider. It's proof you have no right to our father's estate," Keisha yelled. She signaled the guards. "Throw him out. And throw the old woman's things out too. We're done protecting a liar." As the guards moved to grab Isaiah, he didn't resist. He just pointed at the very bottom of the birth certificate, a detail Yolanda had covered with her thumb. "Read the father's name, Yolanda," Isaiah said. "Read it out loud to the neighbors." Yolanda looked down. Her eyes widened, and the paper began to shake in her hand. Her mouth opened, but only a dry gasp came out. She looked at the mansion, then back at the shack, her face twisting in a new kind of horror. Yolanda's hand began to tremble so violently that the paper rattled. She didn't read the name. Instead, she crumpled the certificate into a ball and shoved it deep into her pocket. She looked at the crowd, her eyes wide and bloodshot with panic. "It's nothing," Yolanda screamed, her voice cracking. "It's just a name. It doesn't change anything." Keisha grabbed Isaiah's arm, her nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "I don't care whose name is on that paper. You died 12 years ago. We have the death certificate. We spent the insurance money on this land. You're just a ghost trying to haunt our success." Isaiah stood perfectly still. He didn't pull away. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the security guards who were now pinning his arms behind his back. "If I'm a ghost, Keisha, then why are you so afraid of what's in that shack?" Keisha snapped. The pressure of the crowd, the Cadillac, and the return of the dead was too much. She turned to the guards, her face twisting with a blind, ugly rage. "Get them both out now. Drag the old woman out of that hut. Throw her clothes in the mud. I want this trash cleared off my property before the first guest arrives for the gala." The neighbors cheered. They pulled out their phones to record the cleansing. One guard kicked over the bucket of dirty laundry, soaking the dirt floor. Another grabbed Doris by her thin shoulders and began dragging her toward the gravel path. "No, please," Doris cried out, her voice breaking. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was reaching for the small, locked wooden box that had fallen into the dirt. Not the box, Isaiah. Don't let them take the box. Keisha stepped over the box and kicked it toward the drainage ditch. There is no Isaiah here, she yelled at her mother. Your son is a rotting pile of bones in a foreign country. This man is a thief. Isaiah watched as his mother's face hit the gravel. He watched as Yolanda whispered something into her phone, her eyes darting toward the mansions. She wasn't calling the police. She was calling a number Isaiah recognized, a number belonging to a private demolition crew. As the guards pushed Isaiah toward the gate, he saw a heavy bulldozer turning the corner of the street. It wasn't coming for the mansions. It was heading straight for the shack where Doris had lived for 12 years. Wait, Isaiah said, his voice dropping to a whisper that made the guard stop. You think you own this land because of a death certificate. You didn't even check who signed it, did you? Keisha laughed. A hysterical, high-pitched sound. We signed it. We saw the body. We buried you, Marcus, or Isaiah, or whoever you are. She signaled the bulldozer to move forward. But as the engine roared, a black SUV with government plates pulled up, screeching to a halt right in front of the gate. A man in a dark suit stepped out, holding a silver briefcase. He didn't look at the sisters. He walked straight to Isaiah and bowed his head. Sir, the man said, the forensic audit is complete. You were right. It wasn't just insurance fraud. It was something much worse. The man with the briefcase stepped aside as the bulldozer's engine let out a deafening roar. Keisha didn't wait for any explanations. She waved her hand frantically at the driver. Do it now. Level that eyesore to the ground. The massive steel blade lowered, biting into the dry earth. With a sickening crunch, the front porch of the shack collapsed into splinters. Doris let out a piercing wail, struggling against the guard's grip. My memories. Everything I have left of him is in there. She collapsed onto her knees, her forehead touching the sharp gravel. Isaiah tried to lunge forward, but the 3 security guards slammed him against the gate. His tailored suit jacket was torn. His face was pressed against the cold iron bars. He watched helpless as the bulldozer pushed further into the small room. The wooden box, the one Doris had begged to save, was caught under the heavy tracks. There was a sound of snapping wood and shattering glass. Stop it, Isaiah roared, but his voice was drowned out by the cheers of the wealthy neighbors. They were laughing now, sipping champagne as they watched the trash being cleared. Keisha stood near the rubble, her eyes glowing with a dark triumph. She reached into the debris and pulled out the charred remains of the funeral photo, the one with the black ribbon. She ripped it into pieces and threw it into the mud. You say, old woman, Keisha shouted over the noise. Nothing is left, no son, no shack, no legacy. Yolanda walked over to the man in the dark suit, trying to snatch the briefcase. I don't care who you are. This is private property. Leave before I have you arrested. The man didn't flinch. He looked at Isaiah, then back at the sisters. I am not here for the property, he said calmly. I am here because of the body. The bulldozer suddenly stopped. The driver climbed down, his face pale as he pointed toward the foundation of the shack. A hidden cellar had been exposed by the blade, a small, concrete room no one knew existed. Isaiah's breath hitched. He saw Keisha's face turn from triumph to a ghostly, frozen white. She backed away, nearly falling into the drainage ditch. The body, Keisha whispered, her voice barely audible. What body? There was no body in that report. The man opened the silver briefcase and pulled out a single, ancient-looking key. He looked at Doris, who had stopped crying and was staring at the exposed cellar with wide, terrified eyes. The audit found something buried deeper than money, Isaiah. The man said. It found the reason why your mother stayed in this shack for 12 years. And it wasn't to protect your memory. Isaiah looked at the dark opening in the ground. A cold wind seemed to blow out of it, carrying the scent of old earth and a secret that had stayed silent for far too long. He realized then that the son buried in the ground wasn't him. But if it wasn't him, then whose bones were the sisters so desperate to hide under the floorboards? Isaiah pushed past the stunned security guards and ran toward the edge of the exposed cellar. Below him, in the dim light, lay the shattered remains of the wooden box. But as he looked deeper into the concrete hole, he saw something else. It wasn't a grave. It was a metal safe, bolted to the floor, hidden beneath layers of old rags and a single, child-sized jacket. The man in the suit stepped to the edge and pointed his flashlight down. The death Keisha and Yolanda reported wasn't yours, Isaiah. 12 years ago, they filed a claim for their father's secret life insurance. But there was a condition. The money would only be released if the primary heir, the youngest son, was proven dead. Isaiah looked at Keisha. She was trembling so hard her champagne glass shattered on the gravel. "We had to," she shrieked. "You were gone. We needed that money to save the family name." Save the name, Isaiah's voice was like a hammer. Or build these mansions. The man in the suit reached into his briefcase and pulled out a DNA report. They didn't just lie about Isaiah. To collect the maximum payout, they needed a body for the closed casket funeral they held 10 years ago. They told the insurance company it was Isaiah. But the audit found the truths. Isaiah looked at his mother. Doris was standing now, her eyes fixed on the child's jacket in the hole. She walked to the edge, her voice finally coming out strong and clear. "I stayed in this shack because I knew what they did. I knew whose body they put in that grave just to get the millions." The neighbors lined in, their phones still recording, but the air had changed. The judgment was shifting. "Whose body?" Mom, Isaiah asked, his heart freezing. Doris pointed at Yolanda, who was trying to slip away toward her car. "It was the boy from the orphanage. The one you used to play with, Isaiah, Marcus. The boy who went missing the same week you left for abroad." The crowd gasped. This wasn't just about a son returning. It was about a cold-blooded trade. A life for a lifestyle. But as the man in the suit reached for his handcuffs, he looked at Keisha and said, "There's one more thing. The insurance money isn't just gone. It was never theirs to spend." He pulled out a final document, the one Isaiah had found in the trash earlier. It was a deed of transfer. But the signature at the bottom didn't belong to the sisters. And it didn't belong to Doris. It was a name that made Isaiah's blood run cold. "Keisha," Isaiah whispered, looking at the signature. "Who is Anthony? And why does he own both of your mansions?" Isaiah stared at the name Anthony on the deed. He looked at his sisters. Keisha's face wasn't just pale anymore. It was a mask of pure, shivering regret. She sank to her knees right there in the dirt, her expensive silk dress soaking up the muddy water from the bucket she had kicked earlier. "Anthony. He promised he would take care of us." Keisha sobbed, her forehead touching the gravel. "He said the insurance money wasn't enough. He said we needed to invest. We gave him everything, Isaiah. We gave him the land, the mansions, the bank accounts. We thought we were the owners, but we're just his tenants." Isaiah looked up at the towering marble mansions. They were hollow shells. His sisters had traded a human life and their mother's dignity for houses they didn't even own. They were just puppets for a man they had never even told their mother about. Yolanda grabbed Isaiah's hand, her designer rings scratching his skin. "Isaiah, please. Anthony is coming here tonight. He's coming to collect the final payment. He told us if we didn't get Mom to sign over the shack by sunset, he would throw us all out. That's why we were so desperate. That's why we were so cruel." Isaiah pulled his hand away. He felt a wave of nausea. He looked at his mother, Doris. She was standing by the ruins of her shack, holding the child-sized jacket of the boy they had sacrificed. Isaiah walked over to her. He took off his torn suit jacket and wrapped it around her thin, shaking shoulders. "I'm sorry, Mom," Isaiah whispered. "I stayed away too long. I thought the money was enough. I thought I was taking care of you from across the ocean. but I left you in a den of wolves." He turned back to his sisters. He didn't see the powerful socialites anymore. He saw two terrified children who had made a deal with the devil. But Isaiah wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a man who had spent 12 years building a global security empire. "Where is he?" Isaiah asked, his voice cold and steady. "Where is Anthony right now?" Keisha pointed toward the end of the driveway. A long, silver limousine was pulling up. The neighbors stepped back, sensing the shift in the air. The gala music from the mansion suddenly cut to silence. As the car door opened, a man in a white linen suit stepped out. He carried a cane with a gold eagle's head. He looked at the smoking ruins of the shack and smiled. "Keisha Yolanda," the man called out, his voice smooth and oily. "I see you finally cleared the trash. Is the deed ready?" Isaiah stepped in front of his mother. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. He tapped a button, and every light in both mansions suddenly flickered and died. "The deed is ready, Anthony," Isaiah said, stepping into the man's path. "But it's not the one you're expecting. And you might want to look at your phone. Your offshore accounts just hit zero." Anthony's smile vanished. He reached for his phone, but it was already ringing. He looked at the screen, then back at Isaiah, his eyes filling with a sudden sharp fear. "Who are you?" "I'm the heir they told you was dead," Isaiah said. "And I'm the one who just bought your debt." But as Anthony stepped back, he made a frantic signal to the driver of the limo. The engine revved, and the car didn't turn away. It aimed straight for the group standing in the dirt. Isaiah realized then that Anthony wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who was willing to finish what the sisters had started 12 years ago. The silver limousine accelerated, the tires spitting gravel as it aimed straight for Doris and the sisters. Isaiah didn't hesitate. He lunged toward his mother, grabbing her waist and rolling her behind the heavy steel frame of his parked Cadillac. Keisha and Yolanda screamed, scrambling backward into the muddy ruins of the shack. The limo screeched to a halt just inches from the debris, the smell of burnt rubber filling the air. Anthony stepped out again, his face twisted in a mask of desperation. He no longer looked like a polished businessman. He looked like a cornered animal. "You think you can just delete me?" Anthony hissed, waving his cane at Isaiah. "I have the contracts. I have the signatures. This land is legally mine." Isaiah stood up, brushing the red dust from his knees. He didn't look at Anthony. He looked at his own security team, who had now surrounded the limousine, their hands hovering near their belts. Isaiah held up a single blue folder he had taken from the silver briefcase. "You're right about the signatures, Anthony," Isaiah said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the evening. "But you made one mistake. You let Keisha and Yolanda sign as the sole heirs. You forgot that in this state, if a primary heir is found to be alive, every contract signed during their absence is automatically voided due to fraud." Isaiah walked toward his sisters. He reached out a hand to Keisha, pulling her out of the mud. She looked at him with hollow, tear-filled eyes. He handed her a pen and a new set of documents. "Sign this," Isaiah commanded. "It's a confession. Detail every payment you made to Anthony. Detail the life insurance fraud. Detail exactly how you used the boy from the orphanage." Keisha's hand shook so much she dropped the pen. She looked at the mansions, then at Anthony's, who was now being pinned against the car by Isaiah's guards. She realized that the only way to save her mother and herself was to destroy the empire she had built on a lie. Just as her pen touched the paper, a loud siren wailed from the end of the street. But it wasn't the police. It was a fleet of black vans marked with the logo of a federal investigative unit. The neighbors watched in shock as a woman in a dark suit stepped out, holding a recording device. She didn't go to Anthony. She went straight to Doris. "Mrs. Doris," the agent said, "we've been monitoring Anthony's accounts for years. But we were missing one thing. We were missing the testimony of the person who saw him leave the orphanage with that boy 12 years ago. Doris looked at the agent, then at the child's jacket in her hands. Her eyes cleared, and a terrifying realization crossed her face. She looked at Anthony, then back at the exposed cellar. It wasn't just the money. Doris whispered, her voice trembling. Anthony. He didn't just help them with the fraud. He was the one who drove the car that night. And Marcus. Marcus wasn't the only child he took. The federal agents moved quickly, clicking handcuffs around Anthony's wrists. He didn't shout anymore. He just stared at Doris with a hollow, defeated gaze. As the black vans pulled away, taking Anthony and the evidence of a 12-year-old crime, the street fell into a heavy, echoing silence. Isaiah turned to his sisters. Keisha and Yolanda were still sitting in the dirt, their faces smeared with tears and red dust. They looked at the two mansions, then at the ruins of the shack. The bright gala lights flickered one last time and then died completely, leaving the massive houses in total darkness. The houses are being seized tomorrow, Isaiah said quietly. Everything you bought with that blood money is gone. You'll have to work to pay back every cent of the insurance fraud. Keisha didn't argue. She reached out and touched her mother's foot, a silent plea for forgiveness she didn't deserve. Doris looked down at her daughters. She didn't pull away, but she didn't embrace them either. She simply handed the child-sized jacket to Isaiah. "Take me home, son," Doris whispered. "Not to those big houses. Just somewhere where I can see the sun without feeling ashamed." Isaiah helped his mother into the back of the Cadillac. He looked at the neighbors, who were now quietly lowering their phones, finally realizing the depth of the tragedy they had been filming for entertainment. He picked up the small, battered wooden box from the drainage ditch. The lock was broken, but the letters inside, his 12 years of unopened love, were still dry. As the car pulled out of the driveway, Isaiah saw his sisters standing alone in the middle of the dark road. They were no longer socialites. They were just two women standing in front of palaces they could no longer enter. But as the Cadillac reached the edge of the neighborhood, Doris leaned forward and tapped Isaiah on the shoulder. She pointed to a small, yellowed envelope tucked into the very bottom of the wooden box. It wasn't written by Isaiah, and it wasn't from Anthony. "Open it," Doris said, her voice trembling with a new kind of hope. "There's one secret your sisters never found. A secret your father left only for the day you returned." Isaiah opened the letter, and his eyes widened. The story wasn't over. It was just shifting to a new chapter. True wealth isn't found in mansions built on lies, but in the courage to face the truth. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to join our community. What would you do if you were in Isaiah's shoes? Would you forgive your sisters, or let them face the consequences alone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.